Hey, I'm Todd Doherty, Member of Parliament for Cariboo Prince George, and here's another edition of our In Conversation With. And today I have with me Cassy Premack from K.K.S. Tactical. And this is going to be all things about our firearms. And let me give you a little bit of a background. On Tuesday, February 16th of 2021, the Trudeau Liberals announced a new legislation prohibiting the use, sale, and importation of more than 1,500 makes and models of legally purchased firearms based on the Order in Council issued last May. So the legislation that they tabled last week was C-21. The Order in Council issued last May had to do with C-71. Details on the government's original announcements are available on the websites. But what we are talking about today is what they propose setting up is a voluntary buyback program with owners of over 1,500 models and variants listed that will be required to comply with requirements beginning on April 30th of 2022, including agreeing to ceasing and desisting of all use and storing of the firearms indefinitely. The Trudeau Liberals have refused to put a price tag on their legally owned firearm buyback program, but experts are saying it's in the billions. I know that they tried to say it's probably going to be around $3 to $5 million, but one expert I heard recently come out and say it was probably in the $3 to $5 billion likely. And with me today, as I said, is Cassy Premack, and Cassy owns a business in Prince George, BC. It is K.K.S. Tactical. And Cassy, I'm just so proud of you. You have really taken the fight to about this to all the way to the top courts. And you have really put your money where your mouth is. And, you know, you and I appeared on a podcast a while back with our friends at Spruce City Wildlife and Don Willamont and others. And I just was just so impressed with your passion and how articulate you are with respect to firearms and firearms legislation. What I'd like you to do to begin with is, I think that there's a misconception out there that Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister, and his Public Safety Minister, Bill Blair, have led Canadians down the path to believe that really you can just go to a vending unit and purchase firearms or ammo for your firearms, and that's not the case. So maybe can you walk us through the steps to um, acquire your firearms possession and acquisition license?
Of course, yeah, I'm happy to, Todd. So, yeah, they've very much led Canadians to believe that this is an easy, willy nilly process that you could walk into any corner store and pick up a fully automatic firearm that is military grade and go off and do whatever criminals are doing with those. So, what really happens in Canada is you're required to possess a PAL, a position and acquisition license. Now, this is a multi step process to get one of these. First, you need to find an instructor who is offering the course. And you can do two different versions of the course. You can do just the regular PAL, which would allow you to possess non-restricted firearms, or you can do an RPAL, so a restricted PAL, which is a little bit more intensive of a class. So you could either do the one day with the test the next day or 2 full days and the test. So it takes a full weekend really to get your license completed. And that being said, you're going through a full day of instruction from a registered instructor who is monitored by the RCMP. He is mandated on what he needs to include in the course. So you would sit through that, you would go through your firearms book, you would learn about safe storage, you would learn about the proper handling of a firearm, how to deactivate, like everything you need to know to be safe with a firearm. And then the next day you would do a bit of a review, and then you would do a written test with your firearms instructor. And then you would also do a practical test where you are physically handling deactivated firearms and you're showing that you understand how to prove that it's safe, how to unload it, how to store it properly, how to walk around with it, all of the things you would need to know to be safe when you're either sport shooting or hunting or whatever your preferred activity with a firearm is in Canada.
Right,
If,
proficiency and competency. Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
if you pass both parts of that test, you can't pass one and not the other. You need to pass both the written and the physical test. You would then send that off to the RCMP. It is a minimum of 45 days for that to be processed.
And
So
what happens
not
at that time?
so at that time, if they approve it, they're going to go through all of your references. So they're going to look into the people you know. They're going to talk to your past spouses. So if you've been in a conjugal relationship, they're going to talk to those people, and they're going to do a full criminal record check. So they're going to make sure that, hey, you don't have any offenses, right? You are a law-abiding Canadian. And they're going to review all the information you've given. So if there's any errors on that, they're not going to put it through. If your ex-spouse says, hey, I've got some concerns, they're going to talk to her. They're going to check the validity of those concerns, and they're going to do all of those processes. So it's not a quick process by any means. Once they've approved everything in your application, they will send it off and they will approve it, and then you get it back. My personal one took almost 12 months. And it wasn't based off of anything scary or my ex-spouse being concerned or anything like that. Mine was based off of a Facebook post about Christmas. And it just had to do with me posting something about my now husband and I. We weren't currently living together, but we did a joint Christmas post. We said, Merry Christmas from the Parker Premack family. And the firearms officer looked at my Facebook and said, well, are you living together? And we were not. So we didn't lie, but he needed to check that information. So it gets quite in depth on what they are looking for, right? They want to make sure that you are as forefront with your information as possible. And rightfully so, right? There's got to be checks and balances. So once they do that, you're going to get your PAL sent back to you. Now it's going to come little purple card. It's got your name, your birthday, your information. It doesn't have your address on it, but it's got all your other personal information. And you would need that to go to a firearms store. So somewhere that has a business firearms license, which is what I needed to get for K.K.S. So I needed a business firearms license that allows me to sell ammunition and firearms and any other things that I chose to do. So mine includes other provisions because we do consignment sales and things like that. So you need to make sure you have all of that. So you take that and you go to a business and you show them your PAL. They check the validity. So there is an online platform through the RCMP Business Services where you can check the validity of a PAL. So that way we can confirm that it hasn't been revoked in the last 24 hours or nothing is going on. With that, then we can sell you your ammunition or your firearms. But you need to prove that you are who you are, right? You can't just walk in and go, I'm Tom. I would like 7 boxes of 30-06, and you're just going to take my word for it that I have a PAL. That's not how it works in any good establishment, right? Now, there is other ways you can purchase firearms through other non-restricted firearms holders, right? So if you have a non-restricted firearm, you can purchase it from somebody else who has a PAL and they want to sell you their firearm. You can do that. That's reasonable. Or if they have a restricted firearm, you can purchase it from them, but there needs to be an entire transfer done through the RCMP transfer system. So it's not a simple, here, I have a handgun. Would you like my handgun? That's not how it works legally. You have to transfer them, and you would submit a transfer to the RCMP. They would review all the information. So they're going to review my information as the seller and your information as the buyer, and they're going to approve or disapprove of the transfer, and then they will send you the required paperwork to transport that firearm, right? So it's quite in depth. There's a lot of steps that go into the owning of non-restricted and restricted firearms. And then there's an entire category that goes after prohibited firearms in Canada, which are not used on a day-to-day basis. These are typically owned by collectors, typically pieces of history, really, is what they are.
Right.
Or there's actual collectors. So
tell me about the steps that, like, if I want to take my gun and go out to a range, what are the steps that I need to follow to do that?
Are you using a non-restricted or a restricted firearm?
Non-restricted.
So a non-restricted firearm, you can transport that firearm out of sight, out of mind. So you're not leaving it out on your front seat. You're not pointing it at people as you're driving. It needs to be unloaded and securely under a seat or in a trunk, somewhere that people can't see it.
Right.
And you can take it to a safe place to fire your firearm. So that needs to be somewhere where you know what the background is. You can't be firing it into a community. You can't be firing it towards people's homes. You can't be firing it towards bodies of water. You're going to take it and you're going to go to a safe place and you're going to fire it downrange following all of the safety requirements that come with owning a firearm, right? So muzzle direction, trigger control. You don't walk around with a loaded firearm, right? So yeah,
restricted.
If it's restricted, it's a different story. So restricted needs to be transported in a locked case, also trigger locked, and it needs to be taken from point A to point B. There's no, I'm going to go to Walmart and then I'm going to go to the range. No, you're going to leave home. You're going to go straight to your range. You're going to take your locked case out of your vehicle. You're going to unlock it. You're going to unlock your firearm, and you're going to use your firearm at the approved range. And it needs to be a registered range for a for a restricted firearm, right? So it can't just be your buddy's backyard. It can't be the back 40. It needs to be somewhere like the Prince George Rod and Gun Club.
Right. And you have to be a member, correct?
You need to be a member. Yeah, you can get day passes for many rod and gun clubs, but they're recorded, right? So
Yep.
if you were going to be traveling, like say I was going to K.K.S or Smithers and I wanted to go to the shooting range there, I would have to call the RCMP ahead of time, ask them to approve that so that hey, I'm going to be taking my Glock 17 to K.K.S. I'd like to do some target shooting there. They would approve it or not approve it. And I would take it there in my locked case and my trigger lock, and I would use it at that range with the permission of that range. Right. But to own a restricted firearm, you need to be a member of a rod and gun club or some kind of registered gun club in Canada.
So tell me a little bit about your business.
For sure. So my business is K.K.S Tactical Supplies. It's family owned. My husband Dave and I own it together. It originally was a home-based business. So it started with binary exploding targets in 2015. And then from there, we started to kind of grow, right? We realized there was a market for what we were selling. We didn't have any other options in Prince George come 2018. Our wholesale sports had closed. We didn't have, the only thing we had was a gun counter opening at our local Canadian Tire.
Right.
So we are a really big hub for hunting in northwestern British Columbia. So people have to go through here to either go north or west or south or east, right? So if people were going to be hunting in our area, they needed somewhere that they could buy ammunition and firearms. We also have a really vibrant sport shooting community in Prince George. So our local rod and gun club hosts a lot of matches. So they hosted the 3-gun shoot in 2018 that we helped sponsor. They hold IPSC matches, all sorts of that's happening at our local rod and gun club. So those people who are participating in those events need a place where they can purchase their ammunition and their firearms if they're wanting to upgrade their firearms. So we saw that there was a market. So my husband and I really diligently looked for a good place to put our store. We put a lot of effort and time into picking the right location. We wanted to make sure that it was as safe and secure as possible. We have an obscene amount of security in our business. My husband, if anybody knows him, is just, he goes over the top, which is not a bad thing, but there are a lot of cameras. There is lots of safety precautions. We've got extras everywhere. And it's make sure that we could sleep at night, right? The most important thing for us is the safety of our community, right? Absolutely. So our business focuses on families. So we really wanted a family-friendly atmosphere. We built that into the store from putting arcade machines in that often I just full credits for kids so that they can do something while their parents are focused on either buying a new firearm or ammunition or looking at hunting supplies. Up until COVID, we had an indoor airsoft shooting range. It's because of the COVID restrictions, we've had to repurpose that area. So it's now our gun tech and hydro dipping location. But when you come into our store, the idea is that it's friendly, right? That you can bring your small children, you can bring your wife. It's not a men's club. It's everybody is welcome, as it should be in our community.
Well, and that's what really struck me when you and I, when we spoke last year, when we did the, it might have been 2 years now. I guess it's probably in 2019 when we did the podcast. Is that you really have built a family-friendly, because for me, I grew up hunting, I grew up fishing. It was very much a family-oriented, way of life for us. And, I think people through the government's narrative is that this is, that the only people that have firearms. As a matter of fact, we were in a debate, and I think one of the Liberal MPs said that the only gun owners are crazy, and I can't remember the exact terminology that she used, and I just said, that is so wrong, and I don't know which kind of fairy tale world that person lives in, but it's a way of life for us, whether we're out farming or we are providing sustenance for our family. We are hunting and fishing, and I really see that this legislation, not only the legislation that they tabled last week, but this whole kind of gun grab is really to target law-abiding firearms owners. Now, I want to bring you back to when C-71 was tabled, and
Mhm.
just how that overnight impacted you guys, you and your family.
So when the OIC came
The
into effect
OIC, yep,
on May 1st,
yep,
it effectively, originally what we lost was about $50,000 worth of inventory overnight, stroke of a pen, not able to sell this inventory. So for us, that
made you
means
guys
we're
criminals essentially, right? With owning it,
essentially, yeah. Yeah. Well, and we didn't know what was happening. So we're watching the news like every person in Canada does. And we're watching the news and we see that this entire ambiguous list of firearms has been prohibited overnight. And that was a
right,
good chunk of our inventory. One of the goals we had through our store was to provide tactical, which to me, tactical isn't a scary thing. Tactical means it is accessible to
right,
multiple people, right? So if you have physical limitations, you are
right,
able to use the same firearms. So that was a huge chunk of our inventory. So that on itself was like being hit by a car, right? Like just
right,
this blow. So we had invested our savings, we had invested our time, our family's time into building this business that there's a market for in our community, right? This isn't something that we were like, well, we want to do this, nobody cares. There is a market for this in our community. So to lose that overnight was so disheartening, right? And we didn't know if the RCP were coming to seize that property.
mm-hmm.
We contacted our local CFOs. They didn't have any information. At one point, I was sent a Wikipedia link about the shotguns part, about the bore diameter, right? So there was no sharing of information from Ottawa, where the people are passing this legislation, to the communities that were affected, right? So we are sitting on this inventory that I can't sell. I have no direction of. I have no idea if I'm going to be compensated for it. And then to add insult to injury, 2 weeks later, we realized that they are continuing to prohibit firearms listed as variants of the original list. So we lost an additional $25,000 in that. So we're sitting at about $75,000 worth of inventory that I can't sell. I can't move. I can't do anything with, right? And as a small business owner, that's so hard to deal with, right? Because that's my money. That's my community's money. That's my husband's money. That's how I feed my family,
Right,
right? So when I lose a chunk of inventory like that, I don't have a way of recouping that. I don't have unlimited funds sitting in the bank account where I can go, well, $75,000, that's not that bad.
right.
It's a lot of money, right? Like that's huge. So
And
for us, it's been
go,
really detrimental.
and you do a lot in the community, don't you?
I do, yeah. So my husband and I both do. We focused on building our community. So we have 5 children,
Mm-hmm.
2 with disabilities. They age from 5 to the oldest will be 16 in March. So we know that a strong community means that we have strong children, right? So
Amen.
if
Yeah.
we, yeah, right? Like you can't just focus on your own family. You need to focus on the other families who live around you because they are the influence on your family. They are, if we don't build our community up, my children aren't going to have safe places to live. They're not going to have jobs. They're not going to have food, right? So we focused on building our community, whether that's through events for children, like the Candy Cruise that was
Mm-hmm.
held here in Prince George for Halloween as an alternative for
Yep.
because of the COVID measures,
Yep.
or we do the Spruce City wildlife cleanups, right, where we go out into the bush, or we help fundraise for trail cameras to go in prolific dumping areas so that we know who is committing these offenses
Mm-hmm.
and we can target those people to have it stop, right? Because none of us want to go out into the backcountry and see 15 tires and a couch and 3 bags of ripped apart garbage, right? It not only affects our environment, but it affects our wildlife. We are avid hunters, my husband and I, and our whole family. And we want to make sure that those animals are still healthy in 20 years when I have grandchildren and they want to go out, right? So
Yep.
we work on events like that. We help support our local legion. We do a lot in our community because it's important to us. So it's a part of our business, right? So
Well, it's a part of your business. It's a part of a part of who you are, and and the point I'm trying to make is that, again, the government would have people believe that organizations such as yourself, businesses such as yourself, firearms owners they're all criminals. Yet they're not really going after the real criminals in their legislation. Um, you do so much in your community, and yet this legislation that's come down is going to really kind of have a real impact on that. you
It
won't be
does,
able to
right?
actually support your community as much. I mean, I know you guys will still find a way to try and do that. Um,
But it
no,
impacts it for sure, right?
it
It
really,
means that there's less funds to use in the
right.
community if there's less funds coming through the business, right? And my husband and I do a lot out of the business as well. But for us, we've tried to strive to build, like right now, our goal has been to build two really cool local programs in Prince George or in the Prince George area,
Yeah.
right? We've been helping to support the Driftwood program in any way we
Oh yeah.
can,
Great.
which is a combination between a local guide, Michael Schneider, and
Yeah.
the Tackler Nation.
It's
And it
great.
is so, so cool. Like anybody who doesn't know about this needs to
Yeah.
look into it. It is an incredible opportunity for young men who live in a really rural community
Yeah.
who wouldn't have access to some of the things that they really genuinely need and are learning a skill and a trade, which is so, so cool. I'm so proud of them.
We're gonna do
Or
an we're gonna do an in conversation with Michael Snyder on that. So
are you? Oh,
I'm so proud of them for what they're doing with Tackle Nation. They really are taking um, that next generation of First Nations youth and teaching them a skill, and teaching them to get back to nature as well too, and bringing culture into it. It's
oh,
amazing.
I'm so, so proud of them. I think it's incredible.
Yeah.
And we have something really similar local in Prince George called the Hawk program, which is a grade 10 class at DP Todd Secondary School in Prince George, where
Mhm.
they are getting their English and the social studies credits, but they're also out on trap lines. They're learning about firearm safety. They're learning
Amazing.
all of these skills. And I mean, as you and I know from our community, right, our Indigenous youth are not graduating at the same rate as everybody else,
That's
right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
how do we fix that, right? So, it's about growing our community and it starts with every single person. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, you have a place, right? And we need to focus on how do we support those people. So, that's what I'm able to do through KKS because I have this platform, because we've built this community based business, right? And without this business, without this accessibility to it, I wouldn't be able to help with these programs. And not that I'm the only person helping by any means. There are many community members in Prince George and the surrounding areas who are helping to build these programs. But it gives me an opportunity to also help. And
Mhm.
every bit of help is important, right? So
Yeah. Tell me how it makes you feel when you've got people, uh, uneducated people, I guess, yeah, uneducated on the topic, was what I mean, advocating for banning firearms when they really don't understand, um, the process. They don't understand what the impact. How does that make you feel?
it's frustrating for sure, but I also understand. Like the one thing I try to explain to people is that I don't hold it against the mothers in downtown Toronto or Montreal who are looking to keep their families safe. That is my
Right.
goal too. That is the goal of every firearm owner that I speak to. It's not that we want any person to feel unsafe in Canada or like they're at risk, but we know when we're looking at statistics that legislation that focuses on law abiding firearms owners like myself, businesses like mine, doesn't actually impact meaningfully the violence that is happening in these urban centers in Canada. Now, we don't see this type of violence typically in rural Canada, right? We're not seeing this in Fort St. John. We're not seeing this
Touch,
in
touch
Smithers or
wood.
Prince
Yeah.
Rupert. Yeah,
Yeah.
touch wood, right? But
Yeah.
we're not to the same extent, right? I'm not saying there's no
Yeah.
crime in these small communities, but we're
Right.
not seeing shootings like what they're seeing in downtown Toronto and Montreal and
Right.
Surrey, right? And I understand that they want their families to be safe. I want their families to be safe too. I never want any child to be in fear of playing in their backyard, especially from a stray bullet.
Yeah.
But the reality is that my firearms and the firearms of other legal firearms owners in Canada are not the ones that they should be afraid of. The sport shooting community in Canada, there are 1 million, 1.5 million roughly registered firearms shooters. So what I mean is target shooters, right? So
Yep.
sport
Yep.
shooters in Canada versus just over 600,000 hockey players in Canada, right? So when you talk about culture in Canada and you talk about the things that are important to Canadians, any person from around the world, you say hockey and people think Canada,
Yep.
right? But when there are twice as many registered sport shooters in Canada, it is a valid part of our culture in Canada. It's a valid part of many communities. It's an
Mhm.
Olympic sport, right?
That's right.
So these aren't the people who are causing this fear. These aren't the people running around rampant in urban centers in Canada. So targeting us and targeting our firearms and our rights as Canadians, not that we have a right to own firearms, but we have a right to enjoy things. We have a right to reasonable enjoyment of our property, right? So why are we being targeted when our property isn't the issue? Right? So it's frustrating.
100%. And I think that is the thing that, I think, again, that's the thing that is most frustrating and most it just kind of shows the government's hypocrisy on this. There was a bill that was tabled. It was a private member's bill, C-238, that came up for debate and vote on last week. And the Liberals defeated it. There were a few stragglers that from the Liberal bench that actually stood up and said, yes, no, I support this. So that bill, C-238, was a conservative bill that would have imposed tougher sentences for criminals smuggling or who are found in possession of illegal firearms. And they voted against this bill. And then they tabled their legislation, C-21, which actually makes it easier on those that are creating or committing crimes with firearms. Tell us a little bit about how C-21, or actually, I think what we need to do is the inconsistencies with the list, some of the things that we've found when we've gone on there, what they've kind of what they've listed, even to the point where somebody said talked about a spark plug. they listed a spark plug, an AR-135, which is a spark plug.
Yeah,
it's just
insane.
it really is insane, and it kind of just speaks to just the craziness of what they've done. Now, C-21 has gone a step further, and it's even gone to include airsoft. And maybe what we should do is actually tell those that are going to be watching this video, what does that entail? That's paintball guns?
Yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
So what that means is previously replica guns were considered any firearm that shot under 366 feet per second.
Right.
And replica firearms are prohibited in Canada. There is really small groups of people who are able to use them for like movie sets, but they're special licensing and they're very heavily prohibited and restricted, right? So and then regular firearms, so the typical firearms that we would use for sport shooting and hunting, they shoot over 500 feet per second. And to own one of them, you need to have a position and acquisition license. But there was this area in between the 366 and 500 feet per second that included airsoft guns, pellet guns, and paintball guns, and starter pistols, and all sorts of stuff in that. But the main focus right now is looking at the pellet guns and the airsoft guns and the paintball guns. So the pellet guns would include things like the Daisy Red Ryder, which I'm sure any of us that were born in the 80s or earlier is familiar with the Christmas story, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
You'll shoot your eye out.
You'll shoot your eye out. But somehow
Go on, Frankie.
Somehow the federal government of Canada, so the Liberal Party, has become mother, and they are trying to prevent all of us from shooting our eye out with a pellet gun, right? Which, let's be realistic, none of us are shooting our eye out with a pellet gun, right? Like, it's just, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but this is not a problem in Canada. So they're focusing on those firearms, and they're focusing on the paintball and airsoft community. Now, the airsoft community, it's insane. I don't have a huge foot in the paintball community, but I have a really close connection to the airsoft community, especially in Prince George. So my family does participate in airsoft. It's a sport that we enjoy. It's if you're familiar with paintball, it's almost identical, except for without using paint markers, you're using little plastic or starch BBs. They are maybe the end of a pen big. They're 6mm. They're quite small. And the firearms the airsoft guns typically would fire about 400 feet per second. And you would go to places like PG Airsoft, which is a registered nonprofit in Prince George, and they have full insurance. And you would go and you would pay your fee to the member, and you would play for 4 to 6 hours, right? You would go out, and in Prince George, we have some pretty harsh winters. So they were offering indoor games through the winter, which is just incredible, right? It gets us out doing physical activity, which is so important for our mental health.
Yep.
And gets us out as a part of a community, right? And in the summer, they partnered with Nestle Bible Camp 2 years ago, to
Right.
use their existing paintball field. And this year, we've been really helping them focus on their new location, which is a mill on here in Prince George, an old mill that hasn't been used for many years. So it would have indoor and outdoor games and would be an opportunity for tourism in our community and for sports, right? Which is just so needed.
Well, I think it's interesting because I don't know whether
I can see that one.
the viewers can see that, but the circled person at the top is our prime minister. So I wonder how he's going to. Well, wonder how
Justify
the
that?
yeah, I wonder how the people at Shock Paintball, Airsoft and Paintball now feel about their celebrity participant.
Mhm.
Anyways,
I
not
couldn't
able to.
imagine,
Hmm,
right? Like I would be so frustrated. I know for us, I talk to Sean Allen often. Sean
yeah,
Allen is the president of the PG Airsoft group here in Prince George,
yeah,
and he's a close friend. And this is detrimental to them. It's detrimental to the sport, right?
right,
And it's a multi-million-dollar industry in Canada. I've talked to importers, right? Because we deal with them through our business. Our business is about 25% airsoft. We focused on that community as well in our home. And so it's so frustrating because there's no reasoning behind it, right? What is the purpose of prohibiting an airsoft gun?
yeah,
The idea from the Liberal Party the only thing I can concrete information I can get is that they feel like criminals may use these firearms in place of regular firearms to commit a crime. But they may also use a hammer. They may also use a baseball bat. They may also use a 2x4. Are you going to prohibit all of those things? Are you going to prohibit baseball because a criminal could use a baseball bat in the commission of a crime? Or kitchen knives, right? I mean, when you look statistically, knives are used in just slightly less than firearms in crimes in Canada, right? So are we going to prohibit kitchen knives? We're going to make people register them. It doesn't
no,
make any sense, right? So with the airsoft community, these are guys who are working to build a community in their home communities. They're working on a sport, right? Which, like I've said before, is so important for your mental health to have that physical activity, especially right now with COVID, right? This is one of the things that these people are clinging to, right? This is who they are as people. And I think it's amazing. I think if you ever show up to a game, they are amazing. These guys will dress up in full gear.
yep,
They have a lot of pride in their equipment, right? I've gone to games in Quesnel, BC, where they hold a MILSIM event every year, which is a 3 to 4 day event
yep,
typically.
yep,
I've spoken to the Burns Lake Paintball Club, which is also their airsoft club. We help them set up their rentals, and they offer rentals to the local high school,
yep.
right? So they're getting kids out into this sport. And no person that I know goes, this is my gateway to gangs. Airsoft is definitely not a gateway to gang violence. Like it's
My
insane to me.
my son and I, well, I lived vicariously through my son. Well, maybe I did a little bit myself, but we had quite the paintball. Uh, Gosh, we went through just a little fad where we were all about paintball, and we went out to of course when I was working out at the airport, we had the paintball park out there. Then
Yep.
there's the one on the Heart as well. We've gone to paintball parks all over our province and just had an amazing time
Yeah.
playing against others. And it just really is, it takes you back to um your childhood where you were playing these games, and it's a combination of hide and seek and capture the flag and
Yes.
all of these things that just were amazing. And it was just, for me, it was an amazing opportunity to be able to spend time with my son, teach him again, going back to that um that generational thing, that family kind of tradition where we would go out and, when I was a kid, we would go hunting quite a bit with our family. Um, you know, to like when I turned 13, I shot my first deer, and on my birthday,
That's amazing.
I tracked it for almost 6 hours. My grandfather taught me how to track, and my father taught me that. And there's an annual hunting trip every year. Sadly, I haven't been able to go on it because Parliament's usually sitting for the last 6 years, and or we're in an election. But that is just it's a tradition that we were just so proud of, and being able to share that passion with my brother, or with my son, was just something else, right? And now all of a sudden, through this legislation, um, the Liberals have made anybody that has that really criminals.
Yeah. Well, and they haven't really had a conversation about it, right? They haven't
Right.
told this community if they're going to do a buyback, which, I mean, we've already seen that a buyback isn't realistic even for our real firearms. So I
Exactly.
can't see them wanting to offer this to another industry that they've collapsed without thought,
Right.
right? So we've got that. And then we've got just, it's so frustrating, Todd. Like I can't understand where their mentality on this is, right?
Right.
This is not going to keep any of us safer. It's just targeting a community of people who haven't done anything wrong,
Right.
right? It's so
Which
frustrating.
leads me to tell us about the action that you've taken.
So in May, I was approached by the NFA. They offered to fully fund my judicial review of the OIC. So it is a administrative law case that is really looking at the validity of the OIC and whether some of the things that they're putting forward through the OIC, right? So the legal definition of a military assault style weapon, what is that, right? What does that mean? Is that an ambiguous opinion of the governor general,
Yeah.
or is that fact, right? So it goes into a lot of things like that. And so that's what we've been focused on for almost a year now. It's been 9 months of trying to set that up. I have Solomon Freeman, who is an incredible attorney out of Ottawa, he's got a great history with firearms law. So
Yeah.
I'm really confident in him. And so that's been our goal for the last 9 months, is working towards that and building the evidence that we need to prove in court, in federal court, that this OIC isn't valid, that there
So
is no,
there's no basis for it, and I think what's really important to mention is that we've seen over the last year. I'm trying not to be partisan in this discussion, but what we've seen over the last year through 2020 and through this COVID pandemic is that the Prime Minister and his cabinet have really taken advantage of the fact that they have limited the seatings of Parliament,
Mhm.
limited debate. We thankfully we caught them with the WE scandal and almost $1 billion worth of funding that they were going to give to an organization that the Prime Minister and his former finance minister had close familial ties. But in May of last year, they did an OIC, or an order in cabinet, where they, which is essentially a declaration by cabinet without the possibility of parliamentarians to have any debate um, uh, or opposition to it. And I always tell people, I always remind the government that the House doesn't belong to them, Parliament doesn't
No.
belong to them. It belongs to the electors that Canadians that elect the 338 members of Parliament. Just the privilege that we talk about in terms of parliamentary privilege, that doesn't mean I get to ride in fancy cars and go to fancy dinners and stuff, or sit in a fancy office. That parliamentary privilege is that I can't be stopped from presenting the voices of those who elected me, which is why we are where we are today.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, they have turned their nose and snubbed kind of parliamentary procedure for the last year, and so which is really unfortunate, and we need to fight. And I'm so proud of you for taking on this and not just sitting back and going, well, what am I going to do? You've really kind of put your money where your mouth is, and you've walked the walk. And as I said, that first conversation that we had in person at the podcast was really, you really left a mark on me. How passionate you are, and on your website you've got a statement that,
Mhm.
if you're okay, if I can read it.
Yeah, please,
I
Todd.
won't I won't read it all, but it really is your words, and I think to me it just kind of it it just summarizes your passion for this. And so this is your statement on there. Uh, I'm a law-abiding firearms owner. I'm a hunter. I'm a target shooter. I'm a small business owner. I'm also a mother and a wife. I'm licensed to possess firearms. My firearms are registered as required by law. I've always used them and stored them safely and legally. But on May 1st, 2020, the government of Canada prohibited many of my firearms, both those that I own personally and those owned by my family-run business, K.K.S. Tactical Supplies. These firearms were prohibited not by an act of Parliament with the democratic assent of our elected representatives, but by order in council, a declaration by cabinet without the possibility of debate or dissent. Those firearms are now been rendered worthless. My business cannot sell them. I cannot use them. Using or selling those firearms is now a criminal offense, punishable by years in a penitentiary, a lengthy prison sentence for doing something that was absolutely legal just the day before the order came into effect. This is wrong, it is unfair, and it cannot stand. I was always taught that the only way to deter bullies is to stand up to them. As law-abiding firearms owners, we must stand up to bullies in Ottawa who would make us criminals with the stroke of a pen. To stand up to these bullies, I've retained Solomon Friedman of Friedman Mansour LLP in Ottawa. And you go on and you talk about your court case. And I just got to say that this is, this little part, I get, a little emotional talking about it because you're fighting. You're fighting not just you're fighting for your family, you're fighting for the families right across our country. And, in many ways, when people do this, they're standing alone, but you've got people that are behind you. And we need to make sure that your voice is heard, which is why we're doing what we're doing today. And we're hoping that people will share this video. And they can always go to your website as well, too, kkstacticalsupplies.com. We'll see if Bailey can actually put it on the bottom here. I don't know whether he's got the technology to do it, but is there anything more that you want to share with us and to make sure that we get the message out?
I just want to touch on that statement. So this isn't about my business's financial losses. Yep. As much as my business is important and it is my way of supporting my family, it's about the freedom of our country. It's about our parliamentary process, which is so important. And it's about the freedoms of my children going forward, right? I want my children to live in a Canada where they have a choice, where they can trust their parliamentary system and they know that their voices are heard without fighting for these things. When these types of things happen and we just pretend that we're okay with it, they believe we're okay with it. Yep. Right. And it will continue to happen. And where it may not seem like a big problem for the non-firearm community, it's not just about firearms right now, right? It's about your rights as Canadians. It's about your voice.
It's a huge property grab.
It's a huge property grab. The last time they took property to this extent was during the Second World War under the Wartime Act, where they removed the property from the Japanese and they put them in internment camps. And that may seem like an extreme example, but they probably felt that that wasn't a possibility either. Many of those people were 3 to 4 generations in Canada. They were Canadians. Just because they were of Japanese descent, they became a target. Right. And right now, the target in our country is firearms owners. It is the culture of firearms in Canada. And whether that be your sport shooting community or your hunting community or even your Indigenous communities, right? They rely on access to these types of firearms to be able to sustain their families and their communities. Right. And it's important that we have these conversations. It is important that, not that I want to change anyone's mind, but that you hear our voice, because our voice is as valid as anybody else's in Canada.
100%. And again, going back to our earlier comment, this does nothing to stop or curb the flow of illegal firearms and weapons that are coming across the border. This, criminals aren't going to follow just because this has come down the wire. They're not going to say, okay, well, I'm going to turn my guns in now. No. Or they're going to stop getting the firearms from the border communities that are across the way, that are flowing freely from across our border from the U.S. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, when you look at C-21 and they're talking a municipal handgun ban, right? Yeah. So in theory, handguns are already restricted. So they are registered. We know who has what and where in Canada if you are a legal firearms owner. So to prohibit those firearms within a district, to allow municipality to prohibit those handguns, in theory, that should already, there shouldn't be crime in those areas to begin with, if you're going to follow that logic, right? Because we already know where those handguns are. So if you are dealing with handgun crime, if they are seizing a handgun, they should be able to go, it came from here, right? Or they should know who has what. So to prohibit them within these municipalities isn't going to make a difference, right? You're just attacking the law abiding firearms owners, the people who aren't committing these crimes to begin with, because the criminals don't care what the laws are already.
Well, I think again too, they are doing this under the guise of strengthening our firearms rules and regulations when we've already got that stuff, those policies in place, those rules and regulations in place. You got a little visitor with you coming in to sneak in.
Yeah.
Hi,
This is
how
our
are you?
youngest daughter.
Hey there.
You say hi, Daintry?
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
How are you doing?
Good.
You
No,
okay?
you're doing a
Good.
phenomenal
Hi.
job, and I just think that I
I'm at
really
the
appreciate you
school.
taking the time today to tell us about this, and we'll keep fighting for you on this side of the house and making sure that um, that we're doing whatever we can to tackle and take on the government when they're doing these things. It is so important that you've been able to take the time. Sorry, somebody is calling me here. Sorry.
Okay, you heard my doorbell at one point, so I'm
Yeah,
sure.
I thought something
No,
was ready. I thought the microwave was ready over here or something.
no, it's our doorbell.
You know what? Thank you again, and we'll continue to fight for you. And I just in signing off, I think again we need to make sure that policy must make you know, policy must reflect where the real true challenges are. And right now, that is curbing gangs and gang violence and doing everything in our power to do that. We need to provide the supports and support mechanisms to our Canada Border agencies and our police agencies to make sure that they have the funds and supports available to combat guns and gang violence. And C21 and the Order in Council do nothing to do that at all.
No,
And
well,
so, go
to
ahead.
go
Sorry.
further into that, Todd, it would be so much more effective if we were putting the money that they're talking about putting into this buyback program into mental health services, right? If we were, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's a huge thing that you've been championing,
Yeah,
right? Is
100%.
if we invested those billions of dollars into our communities, if we invested them into poverty prevention, mental health services, our youth, we would see a decline in the amount of people who found gang life to be attractive to them, right?
Yep.
Because nobody wakes up one morning and goes, you know what, I don't like my 9 to 5, I'm going to be in a gang. They end up there because either they are suffering with mental health problems, they are dealing with some form of trauma, right? Whether that's intergenerational trauma or trauma that's happened in their lives, or they don't feel they have a choice, right?
Yeah.
So if we can give choices, if we can focus on programs like the Hawk program and on the Driftwood program, if we can focus on mental health and our border security, we will see such a more meaningful impact on the violence and the fear that is happening in Canada.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, Cassy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. We'll continue fighting for you. I'm Todd Doherty, Member of Parliament for Cariboo Prince George, and this has been in conversation with, and we've had Cassy Premack from K.K.S. Tactical talking about the Liberal gun grab.